Welcome back to the Champions Blueprint podcast, where we discuss long-term athletic development and raising healthy kids in a sporting environment. This week, we're going to be discussing all things hockey with Kevin Neeld, PhD. Kevin is currently the head of sports performance at the Boston Bruins, but has been working in pro hockey and at the elite level for over 10 years. I first met Kevin at a sports medicine conference called BSMPG, which is since closed, but it was there where I began my journey in high performance, where I was able to interact and meet a huge number of extremely competent high-level professionals, and Kevin was one of them. I invited him on this week. He spends almost an hour discussing his approach and his beliefs with us, and I hope you enjoy it. And once again, just to make a request that if you enjoy what we're putting out here, I'd love it if you'd leave me a review or share this with any of your peer group. Enjoy the podcast. Well, we were just chatting off air a little bit about your research and your PhD and taking care of the players' welfare, as well as trying to develop team strategy throughout the course of the season and the off season, how that's developed and evolved over time. But maybe if we dial it back a little bit, how did you get involved with an organization like the Bruins? What was your educational background? Were you an athlete as a kid? Who took you into that, and what drove that interest?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think I'll try to keep this as succinct as possible. I was fortunate to be introduced to the sport as a kid and fell in love with the game of hockey at a young age. And, probably around my late middle school, early high school years, had opportunities to help run some hockey clinics, both as far as on-ice work and then helping out with the off-ice side of things, and really developed a passion for both. And kind of had an early idea that I would spend my career, ideally, helping hockey players develop and fulfill their potential. And, you fast forward a few years, I got my undergrad degree in health behavior science with a concentration in fitness management and a minor in strength and conditioning. And really, that was the beginning of a fork in the road moment for me, where I had to decide between going the on-ice hockey coaching skill development direction or more of an off-ice focus. And, obviously ended up pursuing more of the off-ice training and development side of things. I went to UMass for grad school and got a master's degree in kinesiology with a concentration in exercise neuroscience. And then several years ago, completed my PhD in human and sport performance at Rocky Mountain University in Provo, Utah. And, I was fortunate that I was able to go through that process while also working. Prior to coming to Boston, I spent 2 years in San Jose with the Sharks as an assistant strength and conditioning coach there. And prior to that, I had spent 7 years in a private facility in New Jersey, 5 of which I was also fortunate to help be a strength and conditioning coach with the women's Olympic hockey team with USA Hockey. So that's a quick overview of my path to what led me here.
So an overnight success.
Yeah, no, I think the key to being an overnight success is to, wake up every morning, work as hard as you can until it's time to go to sleep, and do that for 10 to 15 years. And then one morning you wake up and somebody thinks it happened overnight for you.
So I think it's funny because the first time actually I was exposed to you was at Boston Sports Medicine Performance Group, those annual meetings, which started over 10 years ago, and I've since discontinued. And even then, you were operating at a great level. So I assume a lot's evolved in the intervening 10 years also.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Those events were hosted by a gentleman named Art Horn, who now works with the Celtics, which is right next door to where our practice facility is. So Art and I just actually grabbed a coffee a couple days ago. I tell him every time I see him, we have to bring those meetings or some iteration of those back again. So there's a lot of good memories from those years.
What strikes me about those groups is if you can consider people who went to them alumni, if you start looking around professional franchises across the sport, I reckon you would find a representation of that particular meeting. The majority of teams and organizations around the United States, as impactful as it was, and as interesting a time as that was also, I think, in sports performance.
Yeah, no, having known a lot of those attendees personally, I can verify that a lot of them have ended up in positions um, that they aspired for. And I think Art as an individual has always been very curious. He's always been very humble, and he has wanted to continue to explore all these different elements of human performance for the sake of his own development. And I think that mentality really attracted a lot of other people that had a similar thought process. And as probably a byproduct of a lot of people sharing that growth mindset and that curiosity and that constant draw to want to improve and to find more ways to better serve the athletes and the clients that they work with. That mindset has led to the success of a lot of the individuals that were at some of those meetings early on. So I think that mentality is contagious and it's served a lot of people well.
Yeah, we'll keep bugging Art about that. Something must be done. We're all old now, so there's a new generation of people that would maybe benefit from it. But I think the point of it really was this idea of surrounding yourself with like-minded people and adopting or immersing yourself in a high-performance environment. And if it doesn't exist where you're at, sometimes you have to go out and find it. And I really think that's been key for the professional development. I really speak to people who are about to graduate, on the cusp of graduating, or think that maybe high performance or professional sport is a direction that they wish to go in.
Yeah, it's a I think Art was on the front edge of bringing people that were pursuing those roles, and really that concept. Obviously, it was more popular it still is, but 10 years ago it was that high performance model was more popular in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, over in those areas of the world, and in a lot of sports that weren't played in the United States. So that now, I think 5 years ago, I don't know if there was a performance director in the NHL. If there was, there wasn't many. Now there are, I believe, 14 of the 32 organizations have somebody serving in that or a similar role that's, overseeing from a high level the direction, the philosophy of the program, and then also the management of all the people working within it to, help serve the athletes. So the field is I think in the early stages of a rapid evolution, and it's amazing to just think of how far we've come over the last decade.
So that description you just gave of that role sounds a lot like the role that you perform at Boston, and I'm curious to know what your day looks like in general. What and I know no 2 days are probably the same, but we were talking previously about the sorts of hours you're putting in and how efficient I think you have to be given the schedule that you guys keep.
Yeah, so I'm my title is the head performance coach with the Bruins. Our as a department, our core responsibilities are the design and implementation of the in-season training program, and then obviously the oversight of the off-season program as well. During the year, our department also oversees the sports science initiatives. So, the on ice workload monitoring, recovery monitoring, building in some sort of embedded testing into our training process throughout the season. We also collaborate, obviously, with the medical staff as far as injury reconditioning and making sure that players are doing everything they can to work around injuries, to stay prepared to make that transition back into the sport as seamless as possible. So those are the main areas. We also have some roles in, I mentioned that in a couple of days I'm headed to the NHL Combine here. We also have some roles in providing feedback to our scouts and to our front office about um, potential draft picks, people that we have drafted that are in our prospect pool and their stages of development, and what we can do to help support them with resources to help them maximize their progress within their setting until they get to our organization. We're also fortunate to have a nutritionist and a couple mental skills coaches that we work closely with too. So just being a liaison for them and making sure that people that pop up on our radar that would really benefit from those resources, that we're able to facilitate that connection. And I think from a bird's eye view, it's our job is really to look at the individual player and the team as a whole and try to identify all the different areas that may impact their development and their performance, and then provide the resources that are going to help them get there.
You were chatting about the combine there, so I think we have a sense of probably some of the tests are looked at the combine, and a lot of them I think are going to be relevant for recruitment, but may not be things which you use on an ongoing basis. So within reason and what you feel comfortable sharing, what type of testing do you do with the players in house, and what sort of ongoing monitoring do you guys typically look at?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think with the combine, there's a lot of discussion around how predictive those tests are of on ice performance, and I don't know that that's really the point of the combine. I don't think that testing process is intended to necessarily provide predictive value in how good of a player any of these individuals are going to become in the future. It's more to get an idea of, organizations are making a significant investment in a player. So it's helpful for them to have an idea of, from a holistic standpoint, where is that player at in their physical development? They obviously have done a lot of legwork in scouting their on ice performance and have an idea of what their game looks like and what some of the physical attributes may be on the ice. But it's helpful to, take a peek under the hood and get an idea of what their raw physical capacities are and how they may be contributing to what they're seeing on the ice. And, then obviously also like their stage of physical development and what some of their training background may be and the impact that may have on not only where they are from a physical development standpoint in terms of training, but then also, again, what they're seeing on the ice and what the relationship is there. I think you see a player that just flies on the ice, for example, and is really gifted from a speed and power standpoint, that does not have very good abilities off the ice in those areas, that also maybe has not been exposed to formal training to any significant extent. And you might look at that and think there's a lot of upside here. They already have a really well developed on ice ability without really the supporting physical infrastructure that could drive that further up. So, that's maybe a small glimpse into how I view testing in general, which is used as a diagnostic process to understand, if we look at kind of the core contributors to performance, if we look at, mobility, can the players get into the positions they need to succeed in their sport? Speed, are they able to, get from point A to point B quickly? Including elements of transitional speed. Obviously, there's very little of hockey that's played in just a straight line consistently. What are their power development qualities look like? That's obviously going to funnel up and impact their skating speed, but also has some relationships with shooting, their ability to give and withstand contact, and then strength. So, battle situations, that comes into play quite a bit. And then from a conditioning standpoint, there's a few different ways that we break that down. One is more of a, within shift conditioning vantage point. So, if a shift gets extended or if a shift is hard, is a player able to maintain their output through some of those scenarios? Penalty killing is an easy one where, you might get trapped in the zone and be going back and forth and have to maintain a high rate of work for an extended period of time. Then you can kind of scan out a little bit and look at the within game conditioning. So, from the beginning of the puck drop early in the first period to the end of the third period, how is their output maintained over that time course? And then scanning out even a little more, it's, how does it look from day to day, from game to game? If we have a back to back, does game two look similar as game one, or is there a massive drop off there? And then over the course of a season, is a player able to maintain, a similar level of output? And as you can imagine, the underlying factors that contribute to all those areas share some similarities, but then also some unique differences. There's, so we'll look at off the ice. We'll look at a 10-yard sprint as a measure of early acceleration. We'll look at vertical jump height. We will look at power outputs relative to body weight in a couple different lower and upper body lifts as a measure of power and strength. And then we have both a continuous aerobic conditioning test and then more of a repeat sprint based conditioning test. And that's kind of our baseline profile of across these different areas. Do we have a player that are there any major red flags? So, relative to the group, relative to our experience with certain standards, are there any areas that clearly jump out at us as a limitation for this player? And if so, based on the feedback from the coaches and front office and from the player themselves, is this a limiting factor for their game and something that is an opportunity where if we can help address that with the player, that it will have a real positive impact on their game? So, that's kind of the training camp testing or the preseason testing diagnostic process for us. Then as the year starts to take shape, we start to look at some of those exact same things on a regular basis throughout the season, but then also obviously factor in some of the on-ice workload measures that we're acquiring from practices. And the goal there is to really just provide feedback on our training process as much as anything. If we are intending to design programs to maintain speed and maintain power and maintain strength, are the measures that we have on those players of their speed, power, and strength progressing the way that we would expect them to, or at least maintaining within a bandwidth that we feel comfortable with? And, with any feedback loop that is created through data acquisition, there's kind of a 3-step process of questioning that we ask. And, the first one is, did we expect it? If a player's numbers are down, is that something we would have expected based off, game density, travel schedule, sleep disturbances, schedule, the effect that may have, and the logistics on the training opportunities that we have, particularly when we're on the road and the resources vary from building to building and city to city. So did we expect it? Then the next question is, can we explain it? So even if we did not expect it, can we look back at any of the information that we have and say, okay, like it may be that because of what was done here or not done here, that has now had this effect and created this response. And then the third question is, does it require an intervention? So, is this something that we would expect will get better based on the plan moving forward and the schedule moving forward that we already have in place? Or is this something that's going to require some sort of adjustment? And that may mean adding more training in a specific, with a specific physical quality in mind. It may mean pulling back in certain areas. It may mean referring the player to a member of our medical staff to address a physical ailment, or maybe to a massage therapist or somebody that can help, downregulate sympathetic tone and help with the recovery process that way. It may mean something like coordinating with our assistant coaches about building in certain types of extra work with specific players before or after practice to work on a specific area. So, hopefully that answers your question. But, I think the testing and data acquisition in general really serves two primary purposes to me. One is a kind of baseline diagnostic process. The other is an ongoing feedback loop to see if our process is delivering the results that we would expect it to.
That's a great answer for me, because it shows, number one, a couple of things to me. By the way, and I love the positivity that maybe intentionally, or now it's just something that you do without thinking about it, that you frame you look at things you find as opportunities, and I can actually sense the excitement in your voice when you say we've found these things, but here's an opportunity for this individual to excel even more. And it's subtle, but how different is that to saying, oh, we found an inefficiency or a problem? Just the framing is great. And then the second part is that it actually is, although you've condensed it really nicely, it has the hallmarks of a very mature program, because you're no longer even asking the question, and I'm sure you guys do on an ongoing basis, but are the metrics or the measurements we're using valid? Now what you're doing is you're comfortable with the things that you've chosen, that you've implemented, and you're actually leveraging them to guide your processes and your outcomes. The language for me is really important around that, and it really speaks to a quality program or an underlying engine or mechanism that's been set up. And I think that's important for people to recognize, is that again, those things don't happen by accident, and they take a lot of hard work and planning and probably a lot of trial and error and a very cohesive team, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've really come to appreciate working at this level in particular, where you're exposed now to players that are from different countries all over the world. Everybody's background is unique. The way that they were brought up through the hockey development process and what their path looked like, what the role that training may or may not have played along that journey, the types of training that players are exposed to and what they gravitate to. There's a lot of range in the path that players have taken to get to this level. And the reality is they're now at this level. So, it's allowed me to really appreciate, and I think I'm fortunate to have a lot of colleagues that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, that will share what they do very openly with me. And everybody does things a little bit different. Everybody has, even with a foundational similarity in philosophy, the way that they action that philosophy into their training process is different. And some of that is driven by logistics and the population that they're working with, but some of it is just driven by differences in how people think is the most effective way to get from point A to point B with any specific goal. And as an example of that, you have players that have all trained very differently that now all arrive at this level. So I have I like to think that I have always been fairly open-minded about the path to get from one point to another. So I certainly have methods that I gravitate towards to help a player develop in a certain area, but I also recognize that those aren't the only ones that will work. So I think that has allowed me to uh, look at where a player is in a certain area and realize that it isn't necessarily identifying some sort of limitation or perceived limitation is really the gateway to a conversation about better understanding. Is this a result of how this player has been training historically? Is this something that will have a positive impact on their performance? It may not. I remember pretty early in my career, I had a player at our private facility in New Jersey that off the ice was not, quote unquote, weight room strong, but on the ice, his ability to protect the puck, to withstand contact, the expression of strength elements on the ice were the strongest points of that player's game. So, how much are we going to continue to chase developing strength to get stronger by my off ice measures in a training facility, at the expense of starting with the on ice performance, starting with the game, identifying what may be most limiting to that player, and then taking a step back and saying, what information do I have that uh, I can then use to support a different path to help them improve in the area that's most going to impact their game. And maybe that is still strength training, as creating a foundation of producing force, and then the impact that can have on and power and speed, etc. But it may not be, and a lot of times it is not. So I think the idea of just recognizing that all we have is opportunities to improve. Whatever was done in the past, and whatever impact that has had on the players in the past. So, we look for these ways to continue to support the players' continued development, or if they're at the in the twilight years of their career, to help maintain their health and a level of consistency so they can keep playing the game they love for as long as possible.
At whatever level they choose. We talked about characteristics of these elite players, and I know you work with developmental athletes this summer. You put up a lot of interesting information freely, by the way, on your social media platforms. What would be priorities for players to look for? First of all, in the off season, in general, across the different age ranges, where should they be spending their off season time?
Yeah, I think the commonality of players at the elite level is that they all have extremely high levels of skill, and then there's obviously tiers to that as well, but the most skilled players may survive on having really high levels of skill, maybe at the expense of having elite athleticism, in the traditional senses, as far as elite levels of speed or strength, or elite levels of conditioning. But the bulk of the players are also exceptional in one or more of those areas as well. And I've been fortunate to work in a couple of different environments where you can bring players in and look at testing data across different levels of development. So, I've worked with youth hockey organizations where we have testing numbers on the entire club. And as you would expect, as you progress across the different age levels, there are noticeable improvements in speed and power and strength and measures of conditioning across those. With the women's national program, we've, looked at different measures, and the players that make a world championship roster have higher levels of higher levels in their testing numbers, in their performance measures, than the players that don't make it. The over 18 players have higher levels than the under 18 players, which are, the U22 players are somewhere in between those two things. So you see this kind of incremental, stepwise increase in the physical development of the players at different levels across genders and across environments. We see that certainly at our level here as well, as far as players moving from prospects to the minor league level to the professional level at the NHL. So that's maybe a entryway of saying that skill really matters, and prioritizing ongoing physical development really matters. Taking a step back, you asked what players should focus on in the off season, and I think the assumption there is that players have an off season, and that's an area where, frankly, youth sports, and this is true in hockey, but this is just as true in all the other major sports, has taken a turn in a really negative direction, where these youth sport programs now are either requiring or heavily suggesting players participate in the same sport year round. And there are several negative consequences of that. One is that there now is not a set structured time for that player to focus on off-season training. And as part of off-season training, that includes the opportunity to explore opportunities to improve specific skills in a open environment, where you're not just being instructed and drilled into doing, these kind of uh, rigid skills based on somebody else's teaching. So that's one thing. Two is you continue then to stress the same structures throughout the musculoskeletal system year round, which we know has implications for the development of structural changes. Things like femoroacetabular impingement in hockey players become increasingly progressive across the developmental span. That has some pretty significant long-term consequences as far as hip health and the potential for future surgeries, and looking potentially past where professional careers would end, is a precursor for osteoarthritis, which has an impact on quality of living, after quote unquote competitive sport wraps up. So that's another one. The third big one is that it now does not allow athletes an opportunity to participate and compete in other sports. And there's so much value in that. It's, we could probably talk for an hour just on that idea alone. But just quickly, other sports allow players to interact with teammates within a different social environment. So there's a real opportunity there to fulfill different roles within a team in a different sport, to learn about the range of what it means to be a good teammate. Maybe you're the best hockey player on your team, but you're a middle of the pack lacrosse player, or maybe you're the fastest skater, but you're slow in soccer, on the pitch, as they say. So the way that you navigate your role on the team, and the way that you have to work around some of the sport specific limitations that you as an individual experience, all of those things will lead to you being better at whatever sport you choose later on down the road. And along a similar thought process, the you're exposed to different coaches and different coaching styles. Again, you get a little bit of that when you're in the same sport across the years, but you get even more of that when you're playing different sports. There's different tactics, different points of emphasis across different sports that will really broaden and make the athlete more adaptable to future situations. But probably the biggest one is just the positive impact that playing different sports has on the player's movement variability and their movement literacy. So I think if you watch players that go through a skill that appears outwardly to be repetitive in the same, so you can, for the people that are listening that are hockey fans, on the Washington Capitals, get a power play, Ovechkin kind of drifts into the same area of the ice and takes one-timers from that spot most games, several times every game, right? And that might look the same, but the reality is the way that pattern, the way that outcome is created is unique every single time he does it. His body positioning might be a little bit different. The angle that the puck comes in is a little bit different. The ice surface and the way that he has to navigate that is a little bit different. And when you play other sports, it's requiring a broader range of movement patterns. You're going to move playing lacrosse in a way that you won't move playing in hockey. You're going to move in soccer or basketball, both as an individual and the way that you organize and move around your teammates to close and create space. All of those things are going to broaden your ability to move in these variable and unique ways. And what that does down the road is it gives your body more possibilities to find a solution for whatever the game is throwing at them. So, I think when players specialize in a sport at too young of an age, they get really good at the rehearsed skills within that sport earlier. So to the outward eye, it looks like their development is accelerating faster. But really what they're doing is narrowing the range of possible solutions that their body has to solve some of these problems that the game will throw at them, whether that's, passes being thrown in bad areas, whether it's, a defender closing in space and them having to read that play to move the puck or move their body to create some more time and space. Whether it's giving or withstanding or avoiding contact, the more body control you have and the more experience you have with variable movement patterns, the more effectively your body is going to be able to find solutions to those situations as they arrive at a higher level later on in your career. And, I think the byproduct from a long-term athlete development standpoint of early sport participation has shown itself in a few different ways. One of which is, I think it accelerates winning the race to the wrong finish line, meaning you get these quote unquote elite 16-year-olds that then don't continue to develop later into their later high school, junior, and collegiate years. Maybe more importantly, a lot of players get caught up in the rat race and just fall out of love with the sport. It's felt too much like a job for too early, too much stress, the mentality of just being engulfed in that sport year round for years and years and years. That voice in their head grows louder of like, why am I really doing this? I'm missing out on some other opportunities. And, a lot of players quit, and there are eye-opening statistics about the dropout rate of kids from sports by the time they turn 14, and then certainly that continues in the years that follow. So, there's an element of that where it's just a real shame that kids are falling out of love with the sport and losing the opportunity then to participate in something that should be bringing them joy throughout those years. And for the people that stick with it, I think there's so much that people are thankful for that sport has brought them in their life. And when you burn out early and you quit, you lose that, you miss that opportunity, and your perspective on it maybe is a little different as far as reflecting back on it in adulthood. The other thing is that it forces people away from physical activity in general, and I think that is probably a bigger discussion. But in a country that wildly suffers from inactivity, I think forcing people out of sport early certainly has a negative impact on people staying physically active into adulthood, whether that's within the sport or not.
Yeah, I think that societal piece is really interesting, and statistics in particular on female athletes are even more alarming, I would say, because the dropout rates and also actually the injury rates are significantly higher. And my suspicion would be that a lot of times, because of the early overload and emphasis on sports specificity, the increase of injury incidence gets up. So you're really just stacking the odds in favor of somebody dropping out of sport altogether and becoming a former athlete before most of us even actually started our athletic journey. And I think that's something that I'm 45, so I still play soccer, albeit at a very recreational level, but it's my main source of activity and exercise these days outside of the gym and whatever. And it's almost for me like a get out of jail free card. So I can have a beer, I can then, well, I won't drink and then go play, but I'll go play, then go socialize, and it's just a fantastic support network as well. I think people overlook that side of sport, and hence that, well, it's just a game or it's only a sport. And my counter to that is it's actually much bigger than that. And I'll segue from that saying we've talked about having a broad movement, variety, or variability through choosing different sports that drive physical literacy. If somebody is now saying, right, I'm going to knuckle down because I've shown some potential and I want to pursue hockey as my sport, approximately what age or what stage of development do you think that becomes a sensible or more sensible option?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think on the early end, it's high school, and meaning ninth grade, where athletes are 13 or 14 years old. I think at that point, I'm not suggesting that athletes should stop participating in all other sports, but I think it's a very natural time to transition into having a primary focus. As athletes get into the later high school years, I think it's more reasonable for them to maybe drop the other sports and focus primarily on one. There's also that's a stage in the physical maturation process as well that it's a really prime window for people to make substantial changes in their fitness levels and their all of the different physical factors that fall under that performance umbrella. So I think having an idea of which sport you want to best prepare for, then allows you to hone in from a supplementary training standpoint as well at that time.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I would probably be in agreement with that, and across the other experts I've spoken to that work in elite sport. As we reverse engineer, we start to say, right, round about this age category is really when most of the individuals start to really knuckle down and get very serious about it. In the intervening period, from a family perspective, what can parents of athletes do to help support them, but also continue to encourage them? Because we also sometimes need a little bit of a push from our parents.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, to be honest, because I think what's in the best interest of the kids from a physical and social development standpoint and an athletic development standpoint is not in line with the way that most youth sports are structured. So, on one hand, you could say pull the kid out of a sport so that they can start another one if their team is forcing them to go year round, or to play, in hockey, if their team is playing spring league and then summer league and all these different things. On one hand, I could say just don't play spring league and summer league and go play other sports. And I think there would be a lot of merit to that perspective. I think it becomes really challenging because there may be an element of also then not reinforcing to the player that they should see their commitments through, and what that means for being part of a group and sticking with that group. And I where I would cling to some hope is just knowing that I have had similar conversations with former athletes and people that work, more in the performance industry, that have recognized a lot of the negative results of the direction that youth sports have taken, and are now starting to create different programs that are set up with the athlete's development and physical and social health in mind. So, from a parent perspective, I think there's taking a step back, sports should be fun. The athletes aren't professionals until they're professionals, until they're paid to play. So as a parent, your role is to support the kid in playing the sport that they choose to play, and to be a positive source of feedback and support, not to be their coach, not to be their drill instructor, not to critique or criticize their effort or performance in any way. That's not the parent's job. That is the coach's job in some respects, but really, especially at younger ages, the idea of playing sport is supposed to be for joy. The kids are supposed to have fun. So that's one. Two, just recognize that there are very real, even if your goal was just to become a professional ice hockey player, there are very real benefits within that goal to playing other sports, let alone the social and the long-term health implications that I had discussed before of playing multiple sports. So playing multiple sports is an important pursuit, and as a parent, it's important to encourage kids, especially at younger ages, to play multiple sports. And that may mean telling them that they cannot play in a spring or a summer league if the kid wants to, and trying to steer them in the direction of another sport. So, I think some parents, they might have a 9-year-old kid that just falls in love with one sport and says, I just want to do this sport all the time. And that's an example of where, as the parent, there's a justification for not allowing them to just play that one sport year round. So looking for opportunities to play multiple sports is another one. Um, Three, I think, especially when they start to hit ages of 13, 14, 15, if the athlete is developing a real passion for a sport and is excited about working towards fulfilling their potential in that sport, the away from sport supplementary training, speed training, resistance training, extra conditioning work, those things are extremely important in maximizing their development, but then in also keeping them healthy and allowing them to endure some of the stresses of higher level sports. So, I think that that would be the last message that I would want to leave parents with, is to try to find people that do a really good job of developing athletes from a physical development standpoint, and to align yourself with those programs when it's the right time.
We, as you know, I'm quite good friends with Derek Hansen, and one of the things he does that I adopted is little community meets. So we take our kiddos, they're 11, 12, so we're going to go 12U this year. Same kids, same team, completely voluntary. We just go through running mechanics. We spend 20, 30 minutes just going through drills, working with them, coaching them a little bit, and then we just let them have at it. Usually they'll bring their hockey sticks and they want to go and hit a ball around. I think, well, if that's your choice, happy days, have at it. Other times bring a soccer ball down or what have you. And that just from capturing the playful, the non-organized element that I think is beneficial, but also making sure that you have a level of consistency and activity during the summer is being good. And that's something that more and more I'm finding a lot of value in as well, just from getting them off the ice and away from the idea of this over drilling and this overly structured play. I think is complicated. What a fun age it is to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value to that idea, particularly with supplementing maybe some structured instruction and working on some specific elements of, whether that's running technique or even introducing more formalized, effortful, whether that's sprinting or jumping or something that falls under the umbrella, maybe more of developing some sort of physical capacity, then supplementing that with unstructured free play where you're allowing the kids to just break up and do something that they enjoy. I think that's one of the things that has largely been stripped out of youth sports right now, is that we have replaced free open play with year-round instruction and coaching. And, there's not, I suspect you grew up this way. I grew up, you'd get a bunch of kids from the neighborhood together and you'd make up a game and then you would play that until it was dinner time and then everybody would go home. And, the teams that you make up and the rules and the way that you navigate those situations would be a little bit different every time. And, even my older brother and I used to just play one-on-one and make up some different games and contests playing by ourselves. But there's no instruction, there's no coaching, there's not the rigidity of the formal sports environment. And it's really in those moments that I think kids, one, develop the passion for the sport and really get to maximize their enjoyment of it. But then two, it is an opportunity away from the spotlight for them to try things that they may not be willing to try, if they know that there's going to be some sort of negative repercussion for trying a certain thing not working. You see, the example in hockey of, if a guy tries to toe drag around a defenseman's stick entering the offensive zone, if it works, they look like a genius. If the defenseman pokes the puck away and it goes the other way and they don't get the puck deep, then, it's like, well, what were they thinking? I think that there's a lot of that hesitancy built into youth sports now, where players are thinking, I'm not even going to try that, because if it doesn't work, I don't want to have to worry about the consequences of, maybe that affecting my ice time or getting yelled at by a coach. And it's really those unstructured free play moments that allow players to be creative and to develop and work on specific skills that they may not in a more structured sport environment. So, I love the idea of doing what you're doing, which is having a little bit of both, having some instruction and helping expose the kids to something that will benefit them moving forward, but then also following that up with, just rolling the ball out there and letting them do whatever they want.
Well, Kevin, lastly, I just wanted to draw attention to you had some online programs running through the summer also, which were almost, I think, we're exclusively more or less strength and conditioning or movement-based programming. I'm going to put a link to that. You tell me a little bit about the partnership there or who you're working with?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the goals that I've always had is trying to provide players that may not have the means to access a private performance training facility with quality programs that they can use to still facilitate their development in a safe and effective way. I know, especially in hockey, the financial commitment is significant. The barrier to entry into the sport as a result of that is quite high. And I know growing up personally, I could not have afforded to go find the local performance training facility and pay somebody to coach me through that training process. So, I simultaneously recognize the profound impact that quality training can have on a player's career, and then also recognize that the resources as far as in-person live training to deliver that are unattainable for a lot of players. So I recently partnered with a training app called Train Heroic, and now I'm offering off-season programs both in terms of comprehensive hockey development, meaning there's an emphasis on mobility, on speed, on power, on strength, and on hockey specific conditioning, and then a separate program that is specific to speed development. So if a player knows my primary focus needs to be on speed, that's a major limiting factor for me, and I want to spend this offseason focusing on that, I have programs in each of those two different categories for players at different age groups. So, we didn't get too deep into it on this call, but the most appropriate and effective training strategies evolve over the course of an athlete's development. So, there is a goal and sport and age specificity element to the programs that I'm offering through Train Heroic. And Train Heroic is an app you can download on your phone. And then basically the program is delivered to you through that. There's exercises embedded. The videos are embedded in all the exercises within the program. So the user experience is fantastic. And that was one of the reasons that I went with them is, somebody can just now open up their phone. The program's right there. It's really easy to navigate and to follow along. So those are up and running right now. And, we're going to spend the summer building out some in-season training programs for youth players as well. So we should have those up before the fall.
Yeah, it looked a great resource. I look at it, and obviously been following some of your bits and pieces that you've been putting up around it, and that is excellent.
I appreciate that.
Well, Kevin, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. It's really insightful. I didn't expect any less, but you really delivered a lot of great information and some tips and bits and pieces that are going to be really valuable, I think, to the community down here and the community at large.
Great. No, I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Champions Blueprint podcast with Kevin Neeld. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you were able to take some useful lessons from that to share with your team, with your child, with other people in your group. If you've enjoyed these podcasts, again, please leave me a review. Please share, leave me a rating. And that way we can continue to educate and reach more people around this very, very important topic, which is extremely close to my heart. Thanks again for listening, and look forward to chatting with you on the next podcast.